Hi and welcome to this video in the MRDCL Fundamentals series, in which we look at defining variables, but particularly focusing on the operators that you can use to pick up different codes, combine variables together, and generally manipulate data so that you can tabulate it in the way that you want. So we're going to start first of all by looking at just a very simple script, and you'll find these files, by the way, in the folder DAT03. So we're going to start by looking at a fairly simple script, and it starts off by picking up gender and age, nothing very interesting there. And then we come to an integer called iShop, which is being picked up from field 8 to 9 in the data. Now we get our first definition, which is coming from a variable. You'll see down here that it picks up in the variable shop. It comes from the variable iShop. Now, in this particular case, it would make absolutely no difference if we repeated the data locations of 8 to 9 there. I always advise against that, and there's a good reason for that, is that if this variable shop was defined much further down the script, and it was obviously a bigger script, you might find it hard to find anything that happened to the data in between. So if somebody had done some checks on some data in here, on fields 8 to 9, and then you picked up 8 to 9 many rows later in the script, you might find that you've got inconsistent data and something that's actually quite hard to track down as an error in your tables. So generally I recommend picking up a variable or data for a variable once only. So we're specifying shop from the variable iShop. We're picking up people who say 0. Here we're picking up people in the range to 1 to 5 inclusive, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. We could have put 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, it would have meant the same thing. 6 to 10, and then finally anybody that's greater than 10, in other words 11 to 99. Now in a short syntax, all you've got is greater than and less than as available shorthand ways of writing greater than and equal to. So if you wanted greater than equal to 10, you can't say that's not valid syntax. You actually can do a much longer expression. You can say iShop GE10, and that would work absolutely fine. And this would give you all the operators that you've got: greater than equal to, less than equal to, greater than, less than, equal to, and not equal to. So all the operators you'd want there. But you tend to get used to just writing greater than 10 when you mean 11 to 99, and less than when you want less than a certain value. And be careful not to forget anything you want less than equal to. So that specifies the ranges that I want. Shop2 shows how you need to make this a multi in this particular case. Now here R would have a negative effect because anybody who is greater than 0 would actually go into this variable more than once, because we're picking up greater than 0 as well as 1 to 5. So there, if we had R, that would have a wrong effect on our results, because anybody who was greater than 0 would go into the reject category because they appeared in more than one place in the variable. So this is a perfectly acceptable way of specifying things. Because people can go in more than once to this variable, it would need to be a multi, unlike the variable above where people can only go in just once. Now we look at age 2. Now further up here, age just picked up the 4 age codes in our data. If we want to collapse those down for some reason, we can say 3 plus 4. That's a perfectly acceptable way to pick the data up. Again, I wouldn't recommend picking up from the data location as it does here. I would actually pick it up from the original variable age and group it together that way. It's a little bit more safe. If you want to pick up people who haven't answered, you could say not 1 to 2. Now that's going to be people who are not 16 to 34, which you might think is the same as people who are in the 3 and 4 category, which is the 35 plus category. But of course that would be slightly different, because anybody who didn't give an age would go in the not 1 to 2 category, but not in the 3 plus 4 category. So there's a slight difference there, which is being explained by that little bit of syntax. Now we come to looking at where you combine codes together, and there's always an alert when you're, well, there should always be an alert when you're mixing and or together, because they can have surprising consequences if you don't understand the way that MRDCL works. So here we're picking up people who are either age group 1 or 2 and gender of 1. In other words, males in the younger 2 age groups, followed by the females in the younger age group, and then the males, and so on. Now that would actually be fine without brackets here. So this little bit of code here would actually work fine, and the reason for that is that MRDCL works from left to right. So basically, the condition to the right will always take precedence if you've got an expression that mixes ands and ors. So in this case, it's going to pick up people who are age of 1 or age of 2, and so if there were no brackets, that would be fine, because when you add on and gender of 1, that would be additive, as it were, to the whole condition, and would actually give you the same answer as if you put brackets on. So in that particular case, it wouldn't matter. What would make a difference is if you reversed it round the other way. If you said gender 1 and age 1 or 2, let's do that like this. So if we typed it in this, that would be something completely different. That means, working left to right, that the bracket would be implied like that. That would be the implied bracket that would be in place. So it would imply that we want people who are male and in the first age category, or they're the second age category regardless of their gender. And that's probably not what you want. So it's good practice not to do that. When you've got mixing and an or together, always put brackets around codes, because it just means then that you know what you're doing is working, and it just puts you through that little thought process that I think is quite useful to consider what you're doing. You can use brackets to a depth as well, so you can use brackets within brackets. If you wanted to then pick up perhaps somebody else, another group, that would be perfectly fine. You could say, I want these people, or now I want something else. That would be absolutely fine to do brackets within brackets. You just need a clear head when you're doing that, I think, when you're doing multiple levels of brackets. So that's using brackets and mixing ands and ors. The same is true when you're working with numbers. Here we've just got simple numbers in here, but these could be variables. So what this is saying, and may be surprising to you, is that again it's working left to right. Always think it's working left to right. So the answer it will return here is 2 times 3, which is 6, plus 6, which is 18. Now if you wanted it to do 2 times the sum of those two numbers and get a value of 18, you would need to put brackets around it. So again, I think it's good practice to put brackets around numeric expressions like this when you want to mix plus and minus with multiply and divide. It's just good practice, and it makes it clear in your head, perhaps as much as anything else, what it is you're calculating and what you're doing when you're adding or subtracting and multiplying and dividing figures to get calculated variables out. You should always remember when you're working with calculations that if you specify an integer as the result, it will just automatically round it to the nearest whole number. So if you were to multiply 1.5 by 3, that would give an answer of 4.5. Now if you stored that as a W variable, that 4.5 would remain as 4.5. If you stored it as an integer, it would round, and in the case of a half, it would round up to the nearest whole number and actually store a value of 5 for you. Even if you went on to use that variable in some other way, it would have that value of 5 stored in it in future lines of code. Alright, so let's look at something else now that you can do. Here we're picking up a series of code 1s on fields 10 to 14. There is a shorthand way of doing that. It's been laid out like that to just make it a little bit more clear here. You can say $10-14, and that would do exactly the same as the string of code that I've got highlighted. And then we can use this operator here, which I find a very useful operator. It's called self-referencing the variable that you're in. You can say $1.5, and that means anything in here in the first 5 bits of the variable. In other words, anybody who's got any answer in here. So we could have just typed in again 1001, 1002, sorry, 1001 or 1101 or 1201 or 1301 or 141, but it's much easier just to type $$1.5, and in other words anything in the current variable in the first 5 codes. Just as if I put $$/1.3 here, it would be anybody with a code 1001, 1101 or 1201. Now the only thing about self-referencing variables is that you can't refer to anything after the point you are in the variable. So I'm at the 6th bit in the variable here. I couldn't refer to something further into the variable. And you can use complex expressions within that $$. So here it's going to pick up anybody who gave 10 code 1 or 11 code 1, but didn't give 13 code 1. So that's quite a nice tidy way of specifying that as 1.2 and not 4. And as we move down here now, we're going to look at how we can combine different things together. I always recommend using a temporary variable when you want to do something that's just being used as a building block for another variable. You can do that by putting an X on the front. So this is picking up Q1, the codes at Q1 above, into a variable called XQ1, and then it's dividing another variable called QQ1 and doing tests on that variable. So it's checking to see whether it's multi, single, blank, or not multi. So you can do the reverse by putting N on the front. You could have not single and not blank as well. So you can do tests on columns, on variables in that way. And indeed you can do tests on columns. And finally here in my banners, a variable where we're combining different things together. So it's picking up age exactly as it was specified above, gender as it was specified above, but Q1 we're combining together. And you can use this concatenation of labels so that you don't have to copy, paste or retype all your labels from what you've already entered above. So we can say that the labels for age, gender and these two groupings for Q1 can be done as just copying the labels from age as they are above, adding on the labels from gender as they are above, but then we want something different here for the brands heard of. We want to have a brands heard of with a heading and A or B combined together, or C, D and E from question 1 being combined together. So that completes this short video on some things you can do with combining variables together and doing tests on variables. There are many more videos in the MRDCL Fundamentals to help you get up and running using MRDCL. Thank you.